Welcome to Hey, It's Carly Rae's Book Club. This is Book Hour, where authors will talk their latest novels, reveal their writing process, and play some fun book games. I'm your host, Carly Rae. Today we have USA Today best-selling author Noelle Salazar. We're going to be talking about her latest novel, The Flight Girls, find out why she decided to write an historical fiction novel about the women involved in WASP, if the 8 years she took to write this novel was consumed with research, and if she will always write historical fiction novels. Plus, we are going to see how well Noelle knows her movie quotes. We'll jump in right after this. Hello, Noelle. Tell us where you're joining us from.
Hey, I'm coming in from Bothell, Washington, which is about 20 minutes outside of Seattle.
I'm so excited to have you on. The Flight Girls was actually my first ever historical fiction novel.
I cannot believe that.
Yeah.
You're having me on. That's amazing.
Yeah. Now, for those who haven't heard of The Flight Girls, here's a close-up of the amazing cover. Noelle, tell those viewers who haven't read The Flight Girls what they can expect and why they need to get their copy.
Well, you can expect female camaraderie, which is kind of a main theme of the story, and a love story because, love. And I think you get a little bit of action and you get to know what this program was, which a lot of people don't know. It was the Women Air Force Service pilots. These women, they stepped in because the men needed to go off to war, but they needed somebody to be testing out these planes that were war-torn or just new off the production line. So these women stepped in and did those jobs so the men could go fight.
Yeah. Well, walk us through the research and interviews you did to construct The Flight Girls. Where did you go? Who did you talk to? We see you got to fly in one of the actual planes.
Yeah. So initially, none of that happened. Like none of that fun, no interviews, no anything. I wrote the story. I wrote the initial story in 8 months. I wrote it. I had a full-time job and I worked on my lunch hour, or I'd come in early and work for like 20 minutes before I logged in. And then after that, I just kind of tinkered with it for 6 whole years until I got my agent. And then it took us another couple of years to sell it. And that whole time was just like tinkering. Like I don't know how many versions of this story were written, but it was a lot. And then my agent, we worked on it for quite a while. And at one point we had interest from an editor, and she was like, "It's a little long for my list. Can you cut 40,000 words?" And we were like, "Okay," because you're not going to say no, right? So we took out an entire character. There was a whole kind of section in the middle that is gone. And then, we finally, and then she, we never heard back. So it was kind of crushing. And then we found the editor that it was meant to be with, who totally understood the story. And she took it in her very loving hands and really dug deep into it and really found the story within whatever it was I wrote, whatever version that was. And then from there, they send you your first round of edits, which is massive. It's a lot of red and diagrams. I had diagrams. And right before I was about to dig into it, I found out that there was a National WASP Museum, which through all of that, I never knew that this thing existed. And so I told my husband, "Hey, there's this museum." And he was like, "Well, we need to go there, right?" And I was like, "Yes, I do." And so I went there and I got to see, so the museum is in Sweetwater, Texas, which is where they trained. And the actual base no longer is there. It burned down years ago and there's a university there now, but they still have the fountain that the women used to jump in or throw each other in after they graduated. And then some of the signage. And then just across the runway is where the museum is. And so walking in there was nothing I could have ever imagined. When I started this book, it was just like a story, and then it became kind of a mission to really share what these women did. And so I got to see this museum, and then a year later, after like right before my book came out, they invited me to come back to the museum, and that's when I met two of the women, which there was a picture of in the little intro. And I also spoke to one on the phone before that, and then I got to go up in a plane, and all of this like informed this story in some way. Like I'd never sat in a plane, so to sit in that space and the metal encasing that I'm in, and looking at all the gadgets and whatever, and I got to fly it a little bit, which was very cool. But it was all just this amazing experience that I never expected to have, because like I said, you're just like creating, like you're just, I'm pulling little bits and pieces from their actual stories, but I'm really just making something up and, hoping people will like it. And then to get to meet these women and be in one of their planes was just like the most incredible experience ever.
Yeah. Now, how important was getting a visual of that time during World War II in America for you in order to capture that atmosphere for the Flight Girls?
It was really important, and actually and kind of hard because it was so long ago. And thankfully, I'd been to Hawaii and I'd been to Paris, so I had kind of a sense of what those atmospheres were, what they are now, and then like imagining it years ago. But Texas I'd never been to, so initially when I was writing the Texas parts, I'm like writing tumbleweeds and whatever, like brown, and just imagining cowboys everywhere. And then I went to Texas many times after, because now my brother lives there now, so I've been there many times. I'm like, oh, it's green, and there's not any tumbleweeds, and oh, they don't actually have seasons, like it's just warm. And okay, so I had to completely rewrite all those parts. But it's really important to get those details, not just for myself, but for the reader to feel like they're there. And then but it is hard because you're now writing it in the 1940s, and most of those things don't exist anymore. I actually stood on a corner in Sweetwater and took a picture because I had found a postcard of that exact corner looking down that exact street, and it was so different. There was like one building that was still there, but it was amazing to stand on those streets in that town where those girls had like walked around on their days off. And it was amazing to just stand like on the pavement where they stood and look up at the sky, and where they flew. And it's amazing. And it was really important to me to just get that as right as I could.
Yeah. And as you said, this is a very female-driven novel with multiple character plot lines. And we also do get romance. Or any of these characters based on any real-life women you talk to or articles on that you read?
Not really based on anybody. I would say that the spirit of the women was most definitely based on my grandmother, who was a military wife. My grandfather fought in the Pacific during World War II, and she was like not even 5 feet tall, had 4 kids, was the most spirited woman ever, but also the most loving. And also I went to boot camp when I was 18. So I knew what it was like to be around like these groups of women in like such a strange circumstance that's not technically normal, I guess. So I feel like they were really just a compilation of women I have known throughout my life.
Yeah. Well, you heard Noelle talk about the Flight Girls. Stay tuned, because when we return, we're going to get a closer look at how Noelle crafts her historical fiction novels. Welcome back to Book Hour. I'm your host, Carly Rae, here with USA Today bestselling author Noelle Salazar. Noelle, in your interview with Good Morning Texas in 2019, you revealed the Flight Girls took 8 years from like start to finish. So tell us about your writing process and all of that.
Yeah, so the story came to me, it kind of fell in my lap. So my aunt was studying to be a docent at the Museum of Flight in Seattle, and they were going to open up this exhibit for the WASP. And I happened to be at her house, and she had a couple books. And at the time, that's really all I could find after my interest was piqued. And so for quite a while, I was just creating and on my own. And then as the years went by, every time I went online, I would kind of find a little bit more and a little bit more. And so then I have to dig back in. And like I said, this went through many, many versions. And that was why, because I just kept finding information on these women that I previously couldn't find. And so I worked on it for 6 years. I pitched it at writers' conferences. There's one in Seattle that I went to for many years. I'm a terrible querier, really awful and lazy about that. And I'm also really shy and an introvert. So it is strange to me that the whole pitching in person thing was what I preferred. But there's something about the chemistry when you talk to an agent that was really important to me. I wanted to make sure I worked with somebody that we were on the same page, we were compatible. And when you're querying, you're sending out, letters and you don't quite get that thing. And I really found that I needed it. So yeah, I pitched the book for 3 years, and it was the third year. I saw my agent. She was doing an agent panel and answering questions, and she was really witty. And I just found her incredibly smart, which also made me kind of scared of her. And then I pitched the book to her, and she was like, "I've been waiting for this book." So I sent her the book, and it took about a month, and I heard back from her, and she was kind of like on the fence about it. She liked the story, but there were some elements missing. And again, the thing she wanted was like more in the beginning, which I had cut out because there was a piece of advice I'd listened to that said, your second chapter is actually your first chapter. So I threw out my first chapter, and she's like, but I need to know these characters before, things happen to them. So, so after a couple months, she was working on it. And then we had a couple years where we were just sending it out and cutting 40,000 words from it and not hearing anything back. And then finally we found the woman that changed everything. So.
Yeah. Well, was there ever a point during querying you wanted to give up? Because I know, as you said before, it took a couple years.
Yeah. I never really wanted to give up, but it really wasn't a process for me. I think everybody's just different in the way that they interact with people. And for me, even though, like I said, I'm shy, there is really something about that chemistry. I talked to so many agents over those 3 years where I pitched. And some of them I could see like, this could work, and then others were like, no. But there just was like, this sort of magic that happened when we spoke. And so, I think for querying, I maybe sent out maybe 20 query letters over years. I was so terrible at it, but, and I would have kept doing, I would have kept terribly doing it, but I never would have given up. But it's definitely, it's a process, and it's really heartbreaking. It's discouraging, but it's just part of the process.
Yeah. Well, what would you say to those aspiring writers watching right now who are where you were at during the querying process?
Don't quit. Like your agent is out there. It is so true that it's subjective. They all have the thing that they like. And you just have to find the right one. And it can take hundreds of query letters. When you hear the stories, they are true. It can take a really long time. I mean, and for me, like, I really was lazy about it, and it took me 3 years to find my agent. But I've met tons of authors that, they sent out a few query letters and found their agent through a slush pile. And so you just can't give up. You have to have like that thick writer's skin and keep going and just believe and have passion in your project. That's really what they're looking for, is that you have passion for your story.
Yeah. Well, one thing I'm curious about is if you always wanted to write historical fiction novels, or if in the 8 years it took for publication, you started to doubt writing in that genre.
So I always thought, I had like all through my 20s, I read women's fiction, like just women's fiction. Jennifer Weiner, Emily Griffin, those are like my go-tos. Like I reread some of their books just because they are my happy place. Yeah. And so that's what I thought I would write. And then the story fell in my lap. And I just couldn't not write this story. The characters were instantly part of my life and talking to me and bugging me and like poking at me, like write this story. And during those years, I mean, I started several other novels that I hope I will one day finish. So I didn't ever think that I would write historical fiction, which I love historical fiction. I just really didn't think that it was something I would do. And I love history. History was like one of my favorite classes in school. I just didn't put the two together. So I'm not surprised, but I'm surprised that it happened. And I don't know. I do hope that one day I do delve into women's fiction. I love those stories. They make me happy. They remind me of my girlfriends. To me, it's such a like fun friendship sort of thing. And there's usually love and God love.
Will we ever see your name attached to a fantasy novel?
I hope so. Yeah, I have a couple stories. Actually, the first book I ever wrote was a fantasy novel. And so I actually took it out the other day and dusted it off and was like, I wonder if this could be a thing. And so I'm cleaning it up and we'll see if one day it kind of makes its way out there. But I do have a young adult fantasy that I absolutely adore. And so I'm really hoping that one day that makes it onto the shelves as well, because I think it's such a fun, sweet, bittersweet story, and that's kind of my favorite kind.
And it's also fantasy?
It is fantasy. I want to say like light fantasy is light fantasy a genre. I always say it's like Meet Joe Black meets The Fault in Our Stars.
Okay.
So, and I remember like when my son was 8, I was telling him about it because that's when I was working on it, and he was like, please finish that story. It was so sweet. And I was like, oh, if only like just for him, I want to finish the story. So hopefully one day.
Yeah. Well, you heard Noelle reveal if she'll ever attach her name to a fantasy novel. Don't go anywhere, because when we come back, it is game time.
Thank you for choosing Three Brothers Wineries. I'm Erica Policelli. I'm one of the partners here at the winery, and I want to tell you a little bit more about our estate. We were founded in 2006 by Dave and Luann Mansfield. We have 40 acres of grapevines, a fully operational farm. All of the wines you're tasting today are from our farm. We have 2 female winemakers, Kim Marconi and Paige Vinson. On our campus, we actually have 3 wineries and a microbrewery. We have an extensive portfolio of not only wine, but also beer, hard cider, wine spritzers, and wine slushy, all manufactured here on site. When we opened our doors in 2007, we had a modest staff of 10. We've grown to employ 40 full-time and 100 part-time employees. We pride ourselves on creativity, innovation, and our company culture. When you make a purchase from Three Brothers Wineries or Warhorse Brewing, you're supporting a majority women-owned small business, and we thank you for that.
Welcome back. It is game time. Today, the first game we're going to play is Guess the Movie Quote. Noelle, I'm going to read you famous movie quotes from AmericanFilmInstitute.com, and you have to tell us which famous movie it's from.
Okay.
All right. The first one is, of all the gin joints in all the towns in all the world, she walks into mine.
Casablanca.
Yes. Ding, ding, ding.
I watched that in so long. I was like, oh no.
All right. The second one is, there's no place like home.
Oh, come on. Wizard of Oz.
Ding, ding, ding. All right. The third one is, hasta la vista, baby.
Oh, that's Terminator.
Yes. Terminator 2. I should have gotten some really hard ones. All right. Fourth one is, after all, tomorrow is another day.
Oh, I don't know that one. Oh.
It's a classic.
Of course it is. I don't know.
We jinxed it. It's Gone with the Wind.
Oh, dang.
All right. The last one, we rob banks.
I don't know. Heat.
A classic couple who robs banks.
Oh, Bonnie and Clyde.
Yes. Well, that concludes our movie quotes. And now we're going to play Would You Rather?
Oh.
All right. The first one is, would you rather have the ability to fly or hear any conversation?
Ooh, fly. I don't want to know.
Second one, would you rather go to a chalet in the French Alps or a private island?
Ooh. As I get older, I'm going to say the chalet.
I would pick that one too.
Somewhere warm. That's all.
All right. The third one is, would you rather be freezing cold on a mountain or extremely hot in the desert?
Oh gosh. I'm thinking of frostbite. And I'm going to say the mountains because there's leaves and sticks, and I can build something to put on.
There we go. All right. The fourth one is, would you rather have to grow all your food or sew all your clothes?
Ooh. I enjoy gardening, so I'm going to say grow all my food.
Okay. And the last one, would you rather spend a day with your favorite athlete or favorite movie star?
Oh, that's hard. I'm going to go movie star just because storytelling.
Yeah. And who would the movie star be?
Oh, that's harder. I'm going to say Matt Damon.
There we go. Good choice. Well, that concludes game time. Noelle, I want to thank you for being on Book Hour and joining us today. Before you go, tell viewers if you're writing more books.
Well, thank you for having me. First off, I am writing more books. I'm writing another historical fiction right now that will hopefully be out next year. Again, it's based on a true or inspired by real women, two Dutch sisters who became assassins during World War II. So,
Wow.
yeah,
That sounds really interesting. I haven't read any historical books like that.
Oh, well, I hope you will read this one.
Yes. Now, if viewers want to stay up to date on all things Noelle, where can they find you on social media?
You can find me on Instagram. I'm at author. I have to think about this. Author Noelle_Salazar. I'm on Twitter. I think it's just Noelle Salazar. And then I'm on Facebook as well, also under Noelle Salazar.
You heard Noelle. Go check her out now. All of her social media handles are in the description below. Noelle, thank you so much for being on Book Hour. And for those watching, I hope you have a great day.
Thank you for having me.